All right, let's talk about something that sounds like it's straight out of a comic book. I mean, imagine a plane so gigantic it's basically a flying city. A single aircraft that could launch its own fighter jets, carry an entire army, and then stay in the air for over a month without ever needing to touch down. Now, you might think this is pure science fiction, right? Well, it's not. This was the CL-1201, a very real, top-secret project from the Cold War for what was, quite literally, the biggest airplane that was never built. Yeah, you heard that right. 41 days. Just let that sink in. That's how long this absolute beast was designed to stay airborne, nonstop. The only reason it would ever have to come down? The crew, all several hundred of them, would eventually run out of food. I mean, its range was basically unlimited. But just staying up there forever wasn't even the craziest part. No, this thing was a true flying aircraft carrier. It was designed to hold and launch more than 20 fighter jets right from its wings and internal hangars. We're talking about the ability to put an air force anywhere on the planet without needing a single friendly runway or even an entire naval fleet to back it up. So you've got to be asking yourself, why? Why on earth would anyone even think of building something so ridiculously huge? Well, this quote right here, it really gets to the heart of the matter. You have to remember, this was the late 1960s, the absolute peak of the Cold War, and the US Department of Defense was haunted by this one terrifying question. What if we suddenly lost access to all our overseas military bases? What if we were cut off? How would we fight then? And that fear, that's what sparked this whole wild idea. The military needed a new kind of weapon, a true flying fortress. They needed a way to drop an entire army brigade into any corner of the globe, especially into those landlocked places that were totally out of reach for the Navy's aircraft carriers. So here's how it all went down. Where in the 1960s, Cold War tensions are through the roof. Then, in 1969, that fear about losing overseas bases becomes a top priority. So that same year, the U.S. Air Force goes to the legendary Skunk Works at Lockheed with a truly mind-bending challenge. They basically said, figure out the absolute biggest plane you can possibly build with today's technology, and then turn it into a weapon that can reach anywhere in the world. And from that challenge, the CL-1201 project was born. So the core mission, the strategic imperative, it wasn't just about having a big plane for the sake of it. No, the whole point was to create a totally self-sufficient mobile army in the sky, an airborne invasion force that could drop troops, gear, and air support wherever it was needed, whenever it was needed, all without having to ask for permission to use anyone's land or airspace. Total independence. All right, so we know why they wanted to build it, but what would this thing actually have looked like? Let's dig into the anatomy of this behemoth, this flying city. Because when you see the numbers, you'll realize just how hard it is to even wrap your head around the scale. Just look at these stats. The wingspan, over 1,100 feet. The length, 560 feet. It was designed to carry a payload of 12 million pounds. And get this, that was just a ballpark figure because the engineers literally couldn't imagine a scenario where it would need to carry more. And to run this whole operation, you'd need a crew of up to 800 people working around the clock. Now, to really put that into perspective, think about the famous Chrysler Building in New York City. This plane's wingspan was 45 feet wider than that skyscraper is tall. Just try to picture that for a second. An airplane wider than a skyscraper is high. It's just absolutely staggering. And believe it or not, the plan wasn't for just one type of this plane. No, they envisioned two different versions working together. First, you had the attack carrier. Think of it as the spearhead of the invasion. This was the flying command center packed with 22 fighter jets and 10 huge attack missiles. And then you had the logistical support version. This was the workhorse, the troop and cargo carrier, designed to haul hundreds of soldiers and over 1,000 tons of supplies right into the fight. And they weren't meant to fly solo. The whole concept was built around an entire airborne fleet. You'd have one attack carrier playing the role of the command ship, and it would be supported by 7 of those massive logistical support carriers. You put all that together, and you have an airborne fleet that could drop thousands of troops and all their equipment, basically everything you need for a full-scale invasion anywhere on Earth. So, back to that big question. How do you keep a flying city in the air for 41 days straight? Well, the answer is pretty wild. You give it its own nuclear power plant. Yup,
The CL-1201 was designed to be powered by an onboard nuclear fission reactor, pumping out a staggering 1.83 gigawatts of power. That's the secret sauce to its insane endurance.
Okay, so this all sounds amazing on paper, right? But as you can probably guess, a design this out there, this ambitious, comes with some equally massive, maybe even impossible engineering hurdles. I mean, just figuring out how to get a machine this huge and heavy off the ground, well, that was a complete nightmare all by itself.
And that brings us to the most obvious problem of all, right? With a wingspan that wide, how in the world could it take off from a runway? You'd need a strip of pavement that was ridiculously wide and miles long. And guess what? A runway like that simply didn't exist anywhere on Earth. So, what was their genius solution?
The answer is just brilliant, really. It wouldn't use a runway at all. The whole thing was designed for vertical takeoff and landing. VTOL, like a Harrier jump jet, but on a godlike scale. The idea was to use a whole bunch of conventional jet engines just to lift this monster straight up into the sky. Then, once it hit cruising altitude, those lift engines would shut off, and the 4 massive nuclear-powered engines would kick in for the long haul.
And when I say a whole bunch of engines, I am seriously not exaggerating. The lighter logistical version needed 54 engines just for liftoff. But the attack carrier, because it was so much heavier, it needed an unbelievable 182 separate jet engines, all firing in perfect sync just to push it off the ground. Can you even imagine that?
And the problems just kept stocking up. I mean, you've got a nuclear reactor on board, so you need a 20-foot-thick shield to keep the 800-person crew from getting fried by radiation. The reactor itself had to be engineered to survive a 600-mile-per-hour crash into a mountain without breaking apart. They even talked about using laser defense systems to shoot down incoming missiles. We're talking tech that was decades ahead of its time. So, in the end, it was just too much. The complexity and, of course, the absolutely astronomical price tag meant the whole project was quietly shelved. And that should be where the story ends, right? Just another fascinating but ultimately failed design from the Cold War's scrap heap. But what if it wasn't? This is where things get really weird. This is where the story shifts from declassified history to a modern-day mystery. So check out this timeline. The CL-1201 project gets studied in '69, and then it's officially canceled in the early 1970s. Then you fast forward a couple of decades to March 13th, 1997. That's the night of the Phoenix Lights, one of the biggest and most famous mass UFO sightings ever. We're talking thousands of ordinary people across Arizona seeing something massive and silent gliding through the night sky. And listen to how the witnesses described what they saw that night. They talked about this giant, V-shaped object flying completely silently. They said it was way bigger than a 747 jumbo jet, so huge that it literally blocked out the stars as it passed over their heads. Now, does any of that sound familiar to you? Because that description, it matches the sheer scale of the CL-1201 almost perfectly. And then there's this, the final piece of this very weird puzzle. Remember how we talked about the attack carrier and the logistical support versions? Well, the official documents also made a quick mention of a third model, a mysterious -2 version. But here's the thing. Unlike the others, every last bit of information about this version has been completely scrubbed from the declassified records. Gone. What was it? We have absolutely no idea. Which leaves us right here, with this one final nagging question. Was the CL-1201 just an impossibly ambitious blueprint that got tossed aside and forgotten by history? Or was a secret version of it actually built? Is it possible that it's been flying silently in our skies all this time, disguised as something else entirely? A forgotten design or something more?